I'm not sure if you picked up on it from the balloons in the hallway, but this weekend represents the 12-year anniversary of Alamo Community Church. We're officially 12 years old this weekend. Yep, that's cool. I tell you, when I stood in front of about 150 people on a borrowed stage in the middle of a rented hotel wedding tent on day one, I can assure you, along with myself, none of us in that room had any idea of what God was up to. At that time, statistics were that 85% of church starts didn't live past year 3. So none of us were thinking about what year 12 would look like. But then look around. Look what God has done. Isn't that amazing? And here's the thing. I don't want you to miss this. That you have been the conduit by which he's done this. You have served. You have invited your friends and your neighbors. Like, you've done something more than attend. You've brought people with you. You have sacrificed. You've invested your time and your money. You have shared your story and shared your life. And God always does. He takes each of our little bits and he puts it together and he makes something great out of it. And we think he's making something great out of it. And I am just thrilled to be a part of it alongside of you. At 12 years old, our preteen years are coming along with all the normal preteen things. I'm not talking about eating Takis and wanting to play Xbox all day. I'm talking about we're starting to find our voice and we're starting to grow in all kinds of awkward ways. In fact, growing pains have become just a normal part of the routine for us here. 2 years ago, we moved into this building, and it felt like we had more room than we knew what to do with. And now, every Sunday, we find ourselves in a position trying to make room. And you know that. I mean, many of you show up, and you know the frustration of trying to find an empty parking spot in the parking lot, an empty seat in the auditorium, sometimes an empty seat in the restroom. It's very frustrating. So I thought that this month, like our birthday month, would be a perfect time to just hit pause on our series through Luke and to talk about this, to talk about the game plan going forward. And so we put all our creative juices together and we came up with this idea of doing a series titled Game Plan. And we're going to talk about all the proverbial X's and O's of where we are as a church and where we're going in the days ahead. But because we understand that this is about something so much bigger than what we're doing right here collectively, we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about the game plan for you and I individually. And here's what I mean by that. If you've ever sat in here on a Sunday morning and sort of internally thought, or maybe on your way out of the parking lot, had the idea of, what does this church want for me? What does Alamo Community Church want for my family? What does Alamo Community Church want for my future? Like, is the big picture of me just to show up every Sunday, to sing some songs, listen to a sermon, try to make it out of the parking lot without using expletives? Like, what's the game plan here? If you have ever entertained that question, then I want to leverage this series to give you the answer. In fact, we're going to circle back around to the details of the church-wide plan at the end of the service today, so I'd encourage you to stick around for that. I got some pretty pictures and some awesome information to share with you. But for the rest of our time this morning, I want to answer that question. Like, what's the game plan for me? What does Alamo Community Church want for me? And just in case you need to slip out early, I'm going to go ahead and give you the answer. Here it is. What do we want for you? We want you to connect with purpose. We want you to connect with people, and we want you to connect with a plan. Underneath this umbrella, this mission of connecting and reconnecting people to God by leading them to a growing relationship with Jesus Christ, we want you to connect with purpose, to connect with people, and to connect with a plan to take your next step in this journey of following Jesus. That's it. That's the agenda, and it'll be our agenda as a church for the season ahead, to connect with purpose, to connect with people, and to connect with a plan. So with the time I have left this morning, I want to talk about the first part of this idea of connecting with purpose. And here's the big idea. You will give your life to something, but will that something give you life? You will give your life to something, but will that something give you life? Intentionally or unintentionally, every one of us, we're going to give our lives to something. For some of us, it's our career, trying to climb the corporate ladder. For others, it's wealth and accumulation. For others, it's health and physique. It may be your kids. It may be travel ball. It may be to try to gain some kind of notoriety in this life. It may be trying to put everything together for an enjoyable retirement. We're all going to give our lives to something. But the question is, will that something give you life in return? And maybe at the end of the day, will that something outlast this life? We're all going to give our life to something. That's a given. Will that something give us life? That's a question. And here's what I'm telling you. The thing that bridges the gap between those two, that part, that piece is filled with purpose. Now, purpose isn't something that most of us grow up spending a lot of extra time and attention on. In fact, our schedules, living in San Antonio, usually they're so busy. It's like to think about purpose feels more like a luxury than a necessity. But every now and then, every one of us gets an inescapable reminder of purpose. And it usually comes in the form of a funeral. You know the drill. We take a half day off from work. We gather in a funeral home chapel to say goodbye to someone we know and love. And as we sit there in that somber moment, we get a taste of a very somber reality. And here it is, that one day, the day is coming where the sum total of our life is going to be reduced down to just a few sentences and a few stories. A few sentences and a few stories where the people who know us best and love us most, they're going to over-exaggerate to make us look better than we actually are. And if you and I are anything alike, when we think about that moment, we hope, in fact, sometimes we pray that the person standing in front of the microphone has something more to say about us than, well, he knew how to keep a good lawn, or she always paid her bills on time, or, I guess all things considered, they were a pretty good person. No, most of us, we want to live our lives in a way that makes a difference in this world. We want to leave this place better than we found it. And here's what I'm telling you. The link between desiring to do that and actually doing it is found in purpose. Now, just to make sure we're all on the same page as far as definition is concerned, here's the definition we're working off of when it comes to purpose. Purpose is the reason for which something is done or created or for which something exists. The reason for which something is done or created or for which something exists. Now, you are very intelligent men and women. So you came into the room today and you already had an idea of this. The thing that we sometimes struggle with, the thing that sometimes trips us up when it comes to purpose is, if it's out there, where do we find it? And if it's possible to find it and somehow obtain it, put our hands on it for a minute, how do we hang on to it? Not just for a moment, but maybe for a lifetime. To help us answer that question, I would invite you to open your Bibles or pull one up on your phone and follow along this morning in the New Testament book of Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 12 is where we are going to be. And as you're turning there, you already know. If you have any history with the book of Hebrews, you know that the preceding chapter, Hebrews chapter 11, is a very, very intimidating chapter of the Bible when it comes to purpose. This is the chapter that's filled with names of people who burned their lives out on God's purpose in this world. Names of people who are so famous that even people who don't read the Bible, don't know a lot about the Bible, they know these names are in the Bible. I'm talking about guys like Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joshua, Joseph, Rahab, David, on and on and on the list goes. People who exuded purpose in their life. I mean, you talk about doing something that's going to outlast your life. These men and women lived in such a way that, come on. Here we are, 2,000 years later. We're still reading their story. We're still talking about it. We're still putting it up on flannel graph and in cartoons so that our kids know them and remember them as well, which, all accounts is amazing. But the thing that bothers us about that sometimes is we look at our life and we think, well, that's not going to happen for me. 2,000 years from now, nobody's going to be reading my story. Nobody's going to know my name. And so our tendency is just to write these men and women off as they're just outliers. It's just people who are other than. But here's the thing I want you to see this morning. in Hebrews chapter 12, right on the heels of all of these fantastic stories, of all these fantastic men and women, the writer of Hebrews tells you and I how we can live with the same kind of purpose that these men and women possessed. Let's check it out together. Hebrews chapter 12, beginning in verse 1, here's what he says. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, again, it's all those names I just mentioned. He says this, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you do not grow weary and lose heart. Behind the backdrop of this passage of Scripture, I want to give you 3 truths related to purpose. 3 truths that I pray help us to connect with it, live in it, and hang on to it, perhaps like never before. I got 3 for you today. Here's the first one. Truth number 1 is this, that purpose is a path. Purpose is a path. The writer of Hebrews described it like this in verse 1. He says, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. You know, the New Testament uses this analogy over and over again of life as a race. And it makes sense because we don't get to choose what the starting line is for us, and most of us don't get to choose where the race ends. But that in-between part, it's filled with all kinds of choices. And here's what I want you to focus in on today. That those choices, when viewed through the vantage point of purpose, they form a path that leads us somewhere. Now, to be true to the conversation, the choices that we make without purpose, with no sense of intentionality, those choices also form a path. In fact, they form lots of paths for us. But the writer of Hebrews here, he talks about this path behind the terminology of a race. And it carries the idea of a finish line that we actually want to cross. So when we typically think about purpose, we think about purpose as an end, not a means to an end. We think about it as the finish line, not the path that leads us to the finish line. But when we think of purpose as a path, then the choices that we make along the way in that in-between time, they're attached to the question of why. Like we find a reason. It was about 12 years ago that an organizational consultant named Simon Sinek, he wrote a book titled Start With Why. Start With Why. I always thought he obviously wasn't a parent because had he been, the sequel would have been Because I Said So. But this was the premise of Simon Sinek's book. It was based around something that he called the golden circle. It looked like this. The golden circle with these concentric circles of what, how, and why. And he said, business leaders, organizational leaders, human beings in general, we all have a tendency to jump to the what of something or the how of something to the exclusion of the why. And he said that where it's like what, when we discover what, it's going to give us a picture of what's in front of us. How is going to give us a process of how to get there. But he says it's why. The why is the most life-changing part of it. Because why is the question attached to purpose. Why holds the potential to bring about the greatest possible change. In other words, it's more than just about knowing where you're going or what you're doing, but it's coming to grips with the reason of why you're doing it in the first place. Truth number 1, purpose is a path. And when we begin to wrap our minds around that, it sets us up to understand this second truth. And truth number 2 is the path to purpose. It's shaped by a person. It's shaped by a person. I've got a question for you. What did you want to be when you grew up? Like when you were a kid and you were thinking about your future, talking about it with your friends, or maybe you were high school junior or senior and you're filling out those admissions applications and you had to, check a major. What did you want to be? Doctor, lawyer, nurse, actor, actress, athlete, front man in a band, president of the United States. What was it for you? I want you to take just a second and I want you to think back and get your answer to that question. And when you do, just for fun, we'll take a little break. I want you to share it with a person next to you and then tell them how old you were when you realized it wasn't going to happen, okay? I'm being serious. I'm going to give you just a second to do that. You may not remember anything from the message. If you're under the age of 15, you'll remember we got to talk in church. Like, that was pretty cool. Hey, everybody come up with an answer. Here's my, when I was a kid growing up, I wanted to be guard for the Chicago Bulls. In fact, I was pretty confident that's what God had marked out for my life. But that dream got smashed right up against B team basketball in junior high. So it ended. Hey, here's my follow-up question to those two questions. Who chose that? Like, who determined what you wanted to be when you grew up? It's not a trick question. Who did that? Well, we did, right? Like, by and large, we made that decision. It may have been shaped by our parents to some degree, by our friends. We heard their hopes and dreams, and we thought, oh, yeah, well, I'll one-up that. So we did that. It may have been, but we chose it. Now, we thought about this way more in terms of profession than we did purpose. But listen, when it comes to purpose, we choose purpose in much the same way. Like, here's the question we ask. What do I want to do with my life? This is it, right? Elementary school, middle school, high school. What do I want to do with my life? And as we attempt to answer that question, we discovered that answering that question is a lot like going to the refrigerator in the middle of the night and you know you're hungry, but you don't know exactly what you want to eat. And so you open it up and you see that bright light and then you start to take inventory of what's in there. It's like, oh, we got some pizza from Tuesday night, and you get a slice of pizza and take a couple of bites and go, no, that's not it. And you look over in the door and you see the olives that were left over from Thanksgiving and get a little spoon and grab a few of those and think, oh, no, that's not it. Oh, there's yogurt in the, so you pull out the drawer, get a little bit of yogurt, get a spoonful of that, wash it down with orange juice and walk away completely unsatisfied. Like, this is what it's like trying to answer the question, what do I want to do with my life? Asking that question is completely normal. But because it's normal, it makes what we read here in Hebrews completely abnormal. Listen to what he said again. He said, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. I say this is abnormal because the implication is if purpose is a path, then there is a path that has been pre-planned for each one of us. That there's a race that's been marked out for us by Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. And when we come to terms with that fundamental shift, that God has a purpose and a plan marked out for me and a purpose and a plan marked out for you, it changes the question from what do I want to do with my life to this question right here. God, what do you want to do with my life? Not what I want to do anymore. God, what do you want to do? My goodness, Rick Warren took this question, he rephrased it in a book title and sold more than 50 million copies of The Purpose-Driven Life to people who held out the possibility that if God really did have a race marked out for them, they didn't want to miss it. They didn't want to follow their plan for their life and reach the end and have nothing to show for it but themselves. Because if our life, if it's all about us, it's going to end when we end. What we selfishly give our lives to, in the short term, it's always going to feel like it gives us some life back. Like there's some joy, there's some excitement, there's some passion. But what we selfishly give our lives to will not outlast our life. But if the writer of Hebrews was right, then God has invited you and I to find our purposes in the purposes of God. And I get it, like if you're thinking, okay, preacher, sounds fantastic. What are the purposes of God? So glad you asked. Let me give you a few of them. Mark chapter 12, verses 30 and 31. Purposes of God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. John chapter 13, verse 34, Jesus speaking here. He said, love one another. As I have loved you, so you should love one another. Galatians chapter 5, verse 13 says, serve one another humbly in love. Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 and 20. Here's something to give your life to. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I'm with you always, even to the end of the age. And we call that the Great Commission. And if it sounds like way intimidating, like, oh, that's, all nations, make disciples of all over the world. How do I even begin to do that? Here's a place to start. 1 Corinthians 10:31. God's purpose for you, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all to the glory of God. I memorized this one in the King James when I was a kid. It said, therefore, whether you eat or drink or whatsoever you do it all to the glory of God. Now, if we switch places, and I were you and you were me, I would be thinking, okay, so if I understand this right, Kevin, then what you're saying is like God's purpose for us is that like we would all become ministers and missionaries, right? Is that the thing? And if that's what you're thinking, I would say you're getting somewhere. But it may not look like you would imagine it would look. For example, my dad was an electrician. He worked for Texas Power and Light for a little more than 35 years. He was an electrician. But for the first 19 years of my life, my dad drove a church bus on Sunday mornings to go around our neighborhood, our little town, and pick up kids who wanted to go to church but whose parents didn't go to church, so they didn't have a ride. So he would go into all these mobile home communities and pick up kids for church. I went with my dad to the church, 6:30 on Sunday mornings. We'd fire up the bus, assuming the neighbors next door to the church didn't siphon the gas out of it. We would fire up the bus, and my dad, from 6:30 in the morning to 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he would pick up the kids, take them to church. After church, put the kids back on the bus, take everybody back home, and then he would go home. For nearly 19 years, my dad did that. He was just an electrician. But because he was an electrician, in addition to picking up kids on Sunday, a lot of times, more times than I could count, on Saturday, my dad said, hey, you're going to be my helper today. And we would go and do electrical work for people who needed electrical work done on their house but couldn't afford to have it done. My dad, he would do it for free. My role was he would say, hey, take this wire, crawl underneath that house right there, and I'm going to tell you when to stick it up through there. And it was like, oh, okay, I thought it was big stuff. True story, one day, when I think I was 10 or 11 years old, we went to do some electrical work, some outdoor stuff for a doctor in our town. And so we probably finished up, we were there early in the morning, finished up somewhere around 3:30. My dad and I go up, we ring the doorbell, this gentleman comes to the door. My dad says, well, Dr. So-and-so, got it all finished, you want to flip your light? And he flipped the light, and sure enough, the lights came on, and he goes, oh, Gary, that looks amazing. Tell me what I owe you for this. And I spoke up and said, oh, you don't owe us anything. Because that's what my dad always said. You don't owe us anything. And to this day, my dad swears that doctor paid him nothing. But I was just like, well, no, this is what I learned. Here's the point. My dad's just an ordinary guy, just an electrician. But he took his ordinary life and his ordinary talent and ability to drive a bus, to do electrical work on houses, and he used it to the glory of God. Ryan Pertell is in this service. He's the principal of Stevens High School. He's the principal of Stevens High School to the glory of God. Bailey Brown is an elementary teacher in our school district to the glory of God. Her husband, Brady, along with Trey Anderson and Craig Ritchie and Daniel Soto and a lot of others of you, are coaches to the glory of God. My friend Matt Allen is a business entrepreneur to the glory of God. Carrie Galbraith is a stay-at-home mom to the glory of God. Are you seeing it? It's men and women who have found their purpose in the purposes of God, and they've absorbed that into their life. They've understood that purpose is a path, and that path, it's shaped by a person. And yeah, we can be that person that shapes the path, but that's too small of a thing to give our life to. God invites us to find our purposes in the purposes he's laid out for us, in the purposes of Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. We get to make that choice. And as we do, we got to come to grips with this third truth. And that's this, that the pursuit of purpose is paved with a price. The pursuit of purpose is paved with a price. Think about some of the language the writer of Hebrews uses here. He uses phrases like, throw off everything that hinders and the sin that entangles. Run with perseverance. Fix our eyes on Jesus who endured the cross. And then he kind of sums it all up with this in verse 3. Consider him who faced such opposition from sinners so that you don't grow weary and lose heart. Purpose, if you pursue it, always comes with a price tag. Purpose, not just discovering it, and not just posting something on Instagram about, hey, here's what I'm doing. No. If you pursue it, it's going to eventually cost you something. We're all familiar with the pharmacy chain CVS. In 2014, CVS became the first major pharmacy chain in the United States to discontinue the sale of tobacco products. Up until that point, selling tobacco products had made CVS millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. But in 2014, their CEO at the time, a guy by the name of Larry Merlo, Larry made a decision to help the company reach a place where they didn't do that anymore. And the explanation that he led them to, it was pretty simple. It was all about purpose. You see, the purpose of CVS was to help people on the path to better health. To help people on the path to better health. And Larry Merlo raised the question, if we're selling tobacco products, doesn't that work against helping people on the path to better health? Like, why would we undermine our purpose by doing something that runs contrary to it? And so they made a decision that they weren't going to do it anymore. It's cost them millions and millions and millions of dollars to hang on to that sense of purpose, to help people on the path to better health. But look around, and CVS is on just about every corner. I think they're doing okay. Here's the deal. Purpose, if you pursue it, it's going to come with a price tag. It's going to cost you something. And following Jesus is no exclusion to that. Do you know why the writer of Hebrews said, consider him so that you don't grow weary and lose heart? Well, think about the purpose of Jesus on this earth. God's purpose for his son was to live, to die on a cross, to bridge the gap between us and God, to reconcile us with God, and to put us in a place, in a position where we could have life and have it to the full. That was God's purpose for Jesus. But we know it wasn't easy. The night before his death, Jesus prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, God, like if there's any other way, if there's something else you could do here, I'm just going to say, like I'd be for that if there's another plan. So the writer says, hey, remember that. Remember him. Because if you don't, the singing songs on Sunday, that won't be enough. Showing up to listen to sermons, dropping something in the offering boxes on the way, it's not going to be enough. You will grow weary and you will lose heart. This is his way of trying to communicate to us what our parents told us growing up. No one ever said life was going to be easy. And we know it's not. I can tell you from the maybe 15 or 20 of us who are in this room today, who were here in the beginning days of Alamo Community Church, that we had no idea how hard it would be or how much it would actually cost. And I'm not just talking about finances. You realize that until we built this building, we spent more than 550 Sundays setting up church in a hotel ballroom and sticking around for an hour and a half, 2 hours when it was over to take it all down and do it all again. Rinse and repeat, show up, do it again the next week. There were Sundays, not just one every now and then, but sometimes 4 out of 6 or 6 out of 8 where we didn't even have a place to meet. The hotel that we met, they would, for a period of about 3.5, 4 years, they would give us month-to-month contracts. It felt a lot like living in a house and knowing you could only live there from 1 month to the next. Like you didn't know what October was going to look like or November was going to look like for you. So there were lots of Sundays we didn't know what we were going to do or if we were going to be able to even meet at all. I think about the early days and I think about the sacrifices that people made. Like there was a family who sold a car. They sold their car and gave all the money that they received from selling their car to Alamo Community Church so that we could buy some of the supplies that we needed to get started for day one. I think about them all the time. I think about men and women like Gary and Becky Crawford who didn't sell a car. They bought 2 different cars, 2 different trucks to pull this 24-foot trailer from Lytle, Texas, every Sunday into San Antonio so that we could set up those supplies and take them down. I think of all the stories of investment and sacrifice, of people who gave more than they'd ever given before to help purchase this land in 2016 and then in more recent days to help build this building. None of us would say, oh, that was easy. Oh, it didn't really cost a thing. But listen, I imagine every one of us would say, oh, but it's so worth it. Like, look around. Look what God has done. And I'm not just talking about a room full of people on a Sunday morning. I'm talking about for some of you that you sit in this room today as someone who would say, I once was lost, but now I'm found. In Alamo Community Church, just a little part of that story of me entering into a relationship with God. I talked to a young lady after the first service, and she said this. She said, hey, in 2018, I was one of those people. I was sitting in the back, like that dark part of the hotel ballroom, and I was looking for God. And she said, and I found him, and it changed my life. I think of those of you who your marriage just went through the craziest time, and you didn't know you were going to make it, and somebody invited you, connected you with somebody who would walk through that with you, who'd pray for you and encourage you. Families that it seemed like it was done. It was over. God put it back together again. And for some of those stories, it felt like he didn't. And that the divorce went through. Everybody didn't come back together for Thanksgiving dinner, but somehow, oddly enough, God gave you a peace in the middle of it all to let you know he hadn't left you. He'll never leave you. He'll never forsake you. Think about the stories of people who would say, listen, I'm disconnected. That was my life. But because of what God has done through this place, I've been connected and reconnected to God in a way that's changed everything about me, about my today, about my tomorrow. The pursuit of purpose is paved with a price. It's not easy, but I'm telling you, you are living proof, and it's always worth it. And here's the thing. I don't want you to miss it. I don't want you to spend your life on some pseudo sense of purpose that's going to lead you to a place and to a thing that isn't going to give you life in return. Our desire at ACC is to connect you, not just with something, but to someone who will give you life. Life here and now, and life and purpose that will outlast this life. And his name is Jesus. Would you pray with me? God, we are humbled. We are grateful. God, I know you don't need us to accomplish anything on this earth. And yet, somehow, by your mercy, you invite us in. I think of Paul's words. He tells us that we've been called to be your ambassadors of reconciliation as men and women who've been reconciled, that we get to shout from the rooftops that in Jesus, God is not counting our sins against us. God, I thank you for that truth. God, I thank you for the men and the women who sit in this place today. And God, they've been your instruments and your tools, your ambassadors to make that message as clear as possible. I praise you for them. I thank you for what you've done in the life of our church. God, we have no idea. Just like we had no idea on day one what year 12 would look like, we have no idea what year 20 or year 24 will look like. But we just confess again today that this isn't our deal. It's not our church, this is your church. You said you would build it. We're just showing up to run wire, to do the labor that you've called us to do. Hey, if you're in the room today with your head bowed and your eyes closed, and perhaps like we're talking about purpose and you've looked for it everywhere else, but you've never really thought about finding your purpose in God, because like you would say, I'm just not one of those people. I'm not like a church person. I'm not a God person. You think he's for everyone but you. Listen, can I remind you that the God who made you, who knows you, he has a plan for you. And I wouldn't pretend to know all the details, but here's what I know. Like the overarching part of that plan is that you would come to a saving knowledge of his son, Jesus. He loves you. And Jesus is a demonstration of that love. If you ever doubt it, all you got to do is look to the cross. So if today you step into this space and you go, you know what, if it's available, Lord, I've tried everything else. I would love to try to spend my life in the purposes of Jesus. And today, with your own words and in your own way, you just make a confession to say, Jesus, today, I give you my life. I acknowledge I've tried. I've done this my way. But it's led me here. It's led me to you. So would you forgive me of my sin? Cleanse me of my past. Today I surrender my life, my will, my purposes to you. Jesus, we thank you for never giving up on us. We thank you for an amazing grace that knows no end. We thank you for an opportunity to celebrate that today. It's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. I would invite you to stand to your feet. Caleb's going to lead us in a song that we get to sing together. And as we sing, I just want you to know, if you're looking, you're praying, you're trying to figure out what your next step towards purpose looks like, I, along with some of our prayer team, we're going to be gathered here in the front. We'd love an opportunity to pray with you, pray for you as we sing together.
Sing this together. Your blood is healing every wound. Your blood is making all things new. Your blood speaks a better word. Your blood, it's the measure of my worth. Your blood, it's more than I deserve. Your blood speaks a better word, speaks a better word. Oh, it's singing out in life, it's shouting down the line, and it echoes through the night. The precious blood of Christ speaks a better word, it speaks a better word. Oh, your blood, the robe of righteousness. Your blood, my hope and my defense. Your blood, the last word. God, you get the true word. Speak to us now. Oh, and it's rewriting my history. And it covers me with destiny. And it's making all things right. The precious blood of Christ. It's rewriting my history. We believe that this morning. It covers me with destiny. It's making all things right. The precious blood of Christ. Come on. It's rewriting my history. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It covers me with destiny. And it's making all things right. The precious blood of Christ. One more. It's rewriting my history. Yeah. And it covers me with destiny. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And it's making all things right. The precious blood of Christ. Come on. It's singing out with life. And it's shouting down the lies. Hear it now. It echoes through the night. The precious blood of Christ speaks a better word. It speaks a better word. It's calling out my name. It's breaking every chain. It's making all things right. The precious blood of Christ speaks a better word. It speaks a better word. It's making all things right. The precious blood of Christ speaks a better word. It speaks a better word. Yes, we praise you. Yes, you do. It's making all things right. The precious blood of Christ speaks a better word. It speaks a better word.
Hey, listen, if today you find yourself at a place, again, you're looking for purpose, or just what's your next step towards finding that, losing your purpose and picking up the purposes of God, man, we'd love to pray for you. I'm going to stick around after our time together today. Some of our staff and prayer team will as well. We'd love to do that. If you go, well, hey, I don't have time to stick around, then one of the things you can do, take advantage of the connection card you received on the way in. On the backside, there's a section that says prayer moments. And if you just write down your prayer request, how we could pray for you, drop it off either at Connection Point or in the black boxes, and we'd love the opportunity to be able to do that. I'm going to invite you guys to have a seat. Do you have a couple minutes? I got some cool stuff I want to share with you. I told you I was going to give you the game plan for our church going forward because, we've had some space issues, and why you guys have been so busy inviting your friends and your neighbors and filling up this place. For the past several months, our elder team and our staff team have been busy meeting with our architect to figure out what phase 2 of this building would look like, primarily when it comes to kids space, space for student ministry, and then space for groups and classes to meet. And so, again, while you've been hard at work, we've been hard at work, and here's what we've come up with. Check this out. We have 12,000, just a little more than 12,500 square feet to add to this building. It'll be along my right-hand side, your left-hand side, all the way down to the curb and then up to a second story that, again, it'll be primarily kids space, student ministry space, and space for groups. and classes. So we are super excited about the possibilities there today. We have pictures. We've already worked with some civil engineers. We got to put it out to bid, and I'll come back and tell you how much that's going to cost on another really exciting day. But for today, this is the best part of it. It's like, oh yeah, we get to look at pictures. Amazing, amazing, amazing. But here's what you know about building space. If you're going to build room, building room takes time. And so we got to figure out, well, what are we going to do in the meantime? So let me give you the plan for that. For the next 2 weeks, we're going to dive back into this game plan series. We're going to talk about, connecting with purpose and connecting with people and connecting with a plan. And then on Sunday, October 2nd, we're going to stop what we normally do, and we're just going to have a Sunday to celebrate. We're going to have our birthday party on October 2nd. We're going to celebrate all that God has done for the last 12 years in the life of Alamo Community Church. Here's what we're going to do on that day. No preaching, so that's already all right, I'm in. We're going to sing songs of thanks to God. We're going to baptize, and we're going to tell stories of connecting to purpose and to people and to a plan. And then, because you can't have a birthday party without food, we have 1,500 hamburgers that we're going to grill, so everybody can, on your way out that day, you don't have to face the dreaded question of, well, what do you want to do for lunch? We're answering that question for you. We have free lunch out on the lawn. You can stick around and enjoy it for as much as you want with people who are here, or you can just box it up and take it home and get straight to the football game, whatever you want to do. But October 2nd. Then on October 9th, our service schedule is going to change. Right now we have 2 services, 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. And on October 9th, those services are going to become 8:30, 10, and 11:30. 8:30, 10, and 11:30. So we're going to take our 2 services and we're going to make 3 services out of them, because that, we discovered, is the easiest way to make space in the meantime. Now, let me tell you what you're already thinking. If we're going to add a 3rd service, then we're going to need a few more volunteers. And if you're thinking that, you are absolutely right. I'm so glad you're thinking that. So here's the deal. If you've been coming to ACC and you're thinking hey, look, I'd volunteer. I just don't know. Where do you need volunteers? Or if you already volunteer and you think look, I'm in. I could stick around a little bit longer. I volunteer for 1. I could volunteer for 2. Then please stop off at our serve table. It's out on the porch. You'll see DJ, MJ, and all those guys there on your way out today. Stop there. There's a QR code that you can scan, and just let us know that you're interested in volunteering and where you would be interested in volunteering. Let me tell you where we need some help. Kids ministry, our hospitality team, our connection point team, and our emergency response team. Those 4 areas, if you'd be willing to say, hey, I'll come and I'll sit and enjoy a service, and then I'd be glad to serve in a service, then please, please, please stop by the table and let us know. This is going to take all of us, and I can just tell you, I would love to stand in front of you and go it's going to be amazing. You're going to think it's a fantastic plan. The truth is, we've never done 3 services before, and so in the beginning it may feel a little awkward. Why did we do this? We have lots of empty seats now, but that's why we're doing it, to create some empty seats for some places, for some people who come and don't think there's room, or for people who've yet to come and need to come and sit and be a part of a community like the one you guys have created. And so we're going to try these service times, 8:30, 10, 11:30 until Christmas. And then if we need to modify it after that, then I'll come back and I'll stand in front of you and say, hey, we got to move it 15 minutes or 20 minutes one way or the other, and we'll figure it out and we'll make it work. Listen, I said a while ago, we had no idea 12 years ago what this would look like today. And I can honestly tell you, I have hopes and dreams and wishes and passion for what 12 years into the future would look like, but I have no real certainty of that. But here's what I do have a certainty about, that whatever that is, God has given me and he's given you an opportunity to be a part of it, to be a part of what he's up to in this world, to be a part of what he's up to in this community, in this city, at Alamo Community Church. And I just want you to know, I am so grateful for you and a chance to serve our great God alongside you. Thanks for being here today. You guys have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday, Alamo Community.